Welcome back to the deep dive with the tech margin. We're always keeping an eye on the stuff that really matters to creators like you. And this whole AI thing, it's getting pretty wild.
I mean, for artists, musicians, writers, even founders, like just thinking about how AI is changing the game. And with all this incredible new tech, I think the big question a lot of people have is, well, where does copyright even fit in?
Like, can you actually own what you make when AI is involved? That's what we're going to unpack.
It really is.
In this deep dive, we've got some fascinating reports from the US Copyright Office, some legal analysis, even a real-life example from the music world with Randy Travis. Our goal here is to give you, the listeners, some actual takeaways. No stuff you can use.
Yeah, I think the core issue here is that copyright law as it stands is really designed to protect human expression. So AI, as amazing and powerful as it's becoming, it's not really seen as a human author, in the eyes of the law, at least not yet.
Okay, so that brings up a pretty big question then. Like, if I'm using AI to write a song or create a piece of art or come up with a business plan, do I actually own any of that?
Well, right now, the US Copyright Office, they're saying no. Really? If it's purely AI generated, like, think of it this way. You wouldn't try to copyright, the output of a random number generator. AI in this context is being viewed more as a tool, not the actual creator.
Okay, so does that mean then that AI is just useless for creative work? Because that's not really the feeling I'm getting, you know, with all the amazing stuff people are doing.
No, absolutely not. Human creativity is still essential. Okay, and there are ways to make sure your work is protected even when you are using AI. It really comes down to understanding what kinds of human input actually make a difference.
All right, so tell me more about this. What are we talking about here?
So one way is through what's called substantial prompt engineering. Okay, and this goes way beyond just giving the AI basic instructions, right? It's more like imagine you're commissioning a painting. You wouldn't just say, paint me a landscape, right? You'd give the artist very specific details about the colors, the mood you want to evoke, maybe even show them reference images to kind of guide their style. Okay, it's that level of detail we're talking about with AI prompt.
So instead of just saying, AI, write me a pop song, I'd give it like details about the instruments, the tempo, the lyrical theme.
Exactly. You're not just letting the AI run wild. Yeah, you're actively shaping the creative output.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So what are some other ways then that I can make sure my work is protected?
Another big one is modifying the AI's output. So let's say the AI generates a piece of music. You could then take that and arrange it. Add your own melodies, maybe bring in some live instruments. You're essentially creating what's called a derivative work, and it's your unique contribution that becomes copyrighted.
So it's like you're taking raw ingredients and turning them into a gourmet meal, right? Yeah, the ingredients themselves aren't copyrighted, but your recipe, the way you put it all together, that's what makes it special.
I love that analogy. That's a great way to put it, and there's a real-world example of this that I think illustrates this beautifully. The musician Randy Travis, after he had a stroke, he actually used AI to release new music. Really? Yeah. His team created what they called a vocal replica. They trained the AI on a ton of his past recordings to really capture his unique vocal style and timbre.
The AI was essentially singing like Randy Travis. That's amazing.
It was incredible, and because it was trained on his voice specifically, it was really seen as an extension of his creative expression, which allowed him to maintain a degree of artistic control. Wow, even with his limitations, it was definitely a very unique case, and ultimately the Copyright Office did grant copyright protection for that new music.
So that's pretty groundbreaking, right? It's suggesting that AI can actually be a tool to enable human creativity, even in situations where traditional forms of expression are no longer possible.
It really is. It's a fascinating precedent. But it also kind of begs the question, well, what about, deceased artists? Could AI be used to create new works by artists who are no longer with us?
Man, yeah, that's a big one. And there's so many ethical considerations there, right? We're talking about the legacies of people like Elvis Presley, John Lennon. Imagine being able to release new albums by these icons decades after they're gone. I mean, commercially, it's huge, right? Yeah. Ethically, it's a minefield. Absolutely. Some people might argue that it's a way to honor these artists, to introduce their music to new generations, but others might see it as just straight up exploitative.
No, profiting off of someone who can no longer give consent. And it goes way beyond just the money too, right? Yeah, if an artist isn't here to guide their creative vision, who gets to decide what new works are created in their name, right? How do we ensure that it's authentic and respectful of their legacy? Exactly. Those are some big questions. There's no easy answers. I think we need some clear legal guidelines, and we really need to have a serious conversation about the ethical side of this before we, go down that road.
Right.
I agree. And, these are exactly the kinds of questions we'll be digging into in the next part of our deep dive. We'll be back after a quick break.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Before we jump into some more examples, I think it's worth kind of unpacking what makes a prompt substantial enough for copyright consideration. Right? Yeah, because it's a little fuzzy, right? Like how much detail is enough? Yeah, there's no like magic word count, unfortunately. It's more about the nature of the input. Like how much creative control does your prompt actually exert over the AI? So imagine you're hiring a composer, right? A very basic prompt might be write a piece for piano, but a substantial prompt would be more like specifying the mood, the tempo, specific instruments you want. Maybe even providing examples of other pieces that you like.
Okay.
So it's like providing a blueprint versus just like a vague idea. Exactly. And remember, it's not just about that initial prompt either. It's about that back and forth process. You give the AI a prompt, you look at the output, you refine the prompt, and so on. That really shows a deeper level of engagement, which I think helps demonstrate your creative contribution.
Makes sense. So to protect my work, I need to show that I'm really guiding the AI, not just hitting a button and seeing what happens.
Yeah, precisely. Another way to kind of strengthen your case is by incorporating your own pre-existing work into the process. Okay, so let's say you're a musician and you feed the AI some of your own melodies or lyrics. Okay, or you're a writer and you use the AI to kind of expand on a story outline that you've already created, right? You're building on your own foundation in a way, and that's really strong evidence of authorship.
So it's like building a house. You can use some prefab materials, but the overall design, the layout, the personal touches, those are what make it your creation.
I love that analogy. That's perfect. So now it happens when you take this a step further and you use AI to modify or build upon an existing work that's already out there. Okay, so let's say you find a public domain image and you want to use AI to create a new version of it. It does. This is where the idea of derivative works comes into play. Okay, copyright law does allow for the creation of new works
So this is where things get a little more complex.
based on existing ones, as long as that new work incorporates enough original authorship. So think of it like writing a sequel to a famous novel or composing a new song based on a traditional folk melody. Got it. You're building upon something that already exists, but you're adding your own creative spin to it.
So I can use AI to build upon a public domain image, but it's the changes I make, the unique elements I add, that could potentially be protected by copyright.
Exactly. So let's say you take that public domain image and you use an AI tool to transform it completely. You add the new elements, you change the style, you create something entirely new. Those additions, the parts that make it distinct, those are what you could potentially copyright.
But the copyright wouldn't extend to the original underlying image.
Your copyright would only protect the creative elements that you added, not the original image itself. Now, so far we've been talking a lot about copywriting, the actual creative output, right? Right? But what about the creator themselves? About AI being used to create replicas of a person, their voice, their image, their likeness?
That's where things get really interesting and potentially unsettling. AI gets more powerful. We're seeing this pop up more and more. Like, I saw this deep fake video the other day of a celebrity endorsing a product, and it was so realistic.
It's scary how real they're getting. It is. And that's exactly the kind of scenario that's raising a lot of alarm bells. It really blurs the lines between what's real and what's AR generated, and it has huge implications for creators.
Right? And this is where the whole right of publicity thing comes in.
Exactly. This is the legal right to control how your identity is used, especially for commercial purposes.
Someone can't just slap my face on a billboard to sell a product without my permission.
Precisely. And this right becomes even more critical in the age of deepfakes, where AI can create these incredibly convincing replicas of people. Right? We're talking about situations where someone could create a deepfake of your voice endorsing a political candidate you absolutely despise. Yeah, or worse, putting your face on someone else's body in a compromising or embarrassing situation,
Why?
like straight out of a dystopian sci-fi movie. Number, but it's a reality that we're facing now. It is. So are there any laws in place to actually protect us from this?
I know.
Well, it's a very gray area, legally speaking. Existing laws, like the right of publicity, are often limited to commercial uses. So if someone creates a deep fake of you for a non-commercial purpose, say a parody video or a piece of art, the legal recourse is much less clear.
So it sounds like we need some serious legal updates to keep pace with AI.
We absolutely do, and there's a growing push for just that. The US Copyright Office has actually been advocating for a new federal law specifically to address the challenges of deepfakes. They're pushing for a law that covers both commercial and non-commercial uses because the harm caused by deepfakes often goes way beyond just financial damage, right? They're also calling for consistent nationwide protection because right now state laws vary widely. Yeah,
Kind of a mess.
it is. It creates this confusing patchwork of regulations.
So we need some clear, consistent guidelines across the board.
Doctor. But in the meantime, what can creators do to protect themselves? Yeah, do we just have to sit and wait for lawmakers to catch up? Right, not at all. There are things you can do right now to be proactive. First and foremost, be mindful of the content you share. Online photos, videos, audio recordings. Okay, the more you put out there, the more material there is for someone to potentially use to create a deepfake. Be cautious about granting permission for the use of your likeness, even in seemingly harmless contexts.
You never know how that material might be repurposed or manipulated down the line.
So be careful about what you post online.
Absolutely. And if you believe that someone is using your likeness without your consent, document everything. Gather evidence, contact an attorney who specializes in an intellectual property law, and consider reporting it to the appropriate authorities.
Welcome back to the deep dive. So we've talked a lot about the legal stuff, the copyright, but I think it's helpful to look at some real-world cases. It really brings it to life. I agree. Shows the complexity, all the nuances. Does. So let's start with Oblivious. Okay, remember that? That AI-generated artwork that made headlines a while back? It was created using Midjourney, right? Which, for anyone who doesn't know, it's one of those text-to-image AI platforms. The artwork itself was really striking, really unique style.
Remind us how it was created.
So the creator used Midjourney, which basically you give it text prompts and it turns those into images. And they wrote a really detailed prompt that was kind of inspired by that Edward Hopper painting, Nighthawks. Right. But with their own twist. Yes, exactly.
That giant white rabbit. But if I remember correctly, the creator couldn't actually copyright the artwork.
That's right. Even though they put a lot of effort into crafting that prompt, it was ultimately Midjourney, the tool itself, that generated the final image. So the Copyright Office kind of saw that as the AI doing the heavy lifting, creatively speaking, and therefore it wasn't eligible for copyright.
So again, it kind of reinforces that idea that AI, at least for now, is seen as the tool, not the author. Yeah. But it also highlights how important it is to understand those terms of service when you're using these AI platforms.
Absolutely. And Midjourney's terms are pretty clear. Like many AI companies, they actually retain ownership of the copyright. For any images created on their platform, users get a license to use the images, but they don't have full ownership.
Okay, so creators out there, definitely read the fine print before you start using these tools. Yeah. All right, let's shift gears to a totally different case. One that was really powerful, I think, for a lot of people, Randy Travis using AI to release new music after his stroke. Just an incredible story.
It really is. It's such a positive example of how AI can be used in a way that's empowering. Because, no, Randy Travis couldn't physically sing in the traditional sense anymore. So his team created this vocal replica, they called it, using AI. And they trained this AI on a huge collection of his past recordings to really capture his unique vocal style.
So it's like they created this digital version of his voice, almost like a digital instrument that plays Randy Travis.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good way to put it. And because it was trained specifically on his voice, it was really viewed as like an extension of his own creative expression, which allowed him to, maintain that artistic control, even with his limitations.
So in this case, the Copyright Office did grant copyright protection for this music. That's huge, right? It kind of suggests that AI can be seen as this tool to enable creativity, even in situations where traditional forms of expression aren't possible.
They did, yeah. It's a fascinating precedent. And it raises a whole other set of questions, though, like what about deceased artists? Could AI be used to create new works by artists who are no longer with us?
Yeah.
That's a big one. It is. Ethically, it's a minefield. It is. We're talking about the legacies of people like Elvis, John Lennon. Imagine releasing new albums decades after they're gone. I mean, commercially, the potential is massive. Yeah, but ethically, it gets really tricky. Some might say it's a way to honor them, introduce some music to new generations. But others might see it as exploitation, right? Profiting off someone who can no longer consent. Yeah. And, it goes beyond just the money. Yeah.
If the artist isn't here to guide their creative vision, who gets to decide? What new works get created? How do we ensure it's authentic? How do we make sure it respects their legacy?
Yeah, that's the question.
Those are the tough questions that we're grappling with.
Honestly, I don't think there are any easy answers. We need clear guidelines, legal guidelines, And we need to have some real conversations about the ethical implications before we go down that road.
Well, this has been an incredible conversation. We've covered a lot of ground today, from like the basics of copyright to the potential and pitfalls of AI and all these creative fields.
It's just the beginning. This field is evolving so rapidly. The key takeaway here is that as AI gets more sophisticated, our understanding of authorship, our understanding of creativity, it's going to keep evolving too. So it's important to stay informed, keep asking these questions. A huge thank you to our expert for sharing all these insights. And of course, thank you to our listeners for joining us on this journey.
Follow the Tech Margin, where Sonia, aka Supersonic, writes weekly original stories about the application of creativity in the age of AI. Be sure to subscribe.
Stay tuned for more deep dives into this fascinating world of technology. Until next time, keep creating, keep exploring, and keep asking those tough questions.
And it all comes down to this: AI is here to stay, and it's shaking things up in every creative field. But the future of creativity isn't about us versus the machines. It's about using these powerful tools the right way, in a way that benefits everyone.